All right, here we go. All right, countdown. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to It's All Your Fault on True Story FM, the one and only podcast dedicated to helping you identify and deal with the most challenging human interactions, those involving someone with a high conflict personality. I'm Megan Hunter, and I'm here with my co-host Bill Eddy.
Hi, everybody.
And we are the co-founders of the High Conflict Institute in San Diego, California, where we focus on training, consulting, coaching, classes, and educational programs and methods, all to do with high conflict since 2008. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, Rebecca Zung, a lawyer who focuses on narcissistic cases, and she's so much more than that. So we're going to hear a lot more from her, and I know you'll enjoy listening to what she has to say today. But before we start, send your questions to podcast@highconflictinstitute.com or on our website at highconflictinstitute.com/podcast, where you'll also find all the show notes and links. All right, so Rebecca, welcome. We are very happy to have you today on It's All Your Fault.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, so Rebecca is a top-ranked trial lawyer, author of Slay the Bully, How to Negotiate with a Narcissist and Win, and the founder of the revolutionary Slay method of negotiating with narcissists. She began studying narcissism so that she could win against them in the courtroom, and she now helps others make the case that she can, oops, I'm saying that wrong. She now helps others make the case that they can win against them too. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll start that over.
She now helps others make the case that they can win against them too with anyone in any situation. All right, so Rebecca, why don't you give us a little background about how you became interested in being a lawyer, first of all, and then secondly, on why you became interested in dealing with narcissists in court and in negotiations. What led you to that point?
Okay, thank you. And thank you for having me. I would say, as far as being a lawyer, I mean, it's something that I kind of always wanted to do, even since high school, but I kind of got derailed a little bit. I got married at 19 the first time, and I had 3 kids by the time I was 22. And then I got divorced very amicably, but we just had gotten married too young. And so I went back to law school at night with 3 little kids while I was still in my 20s. And it was more like, I need to survive. I need to put a roof over my kid's head. I need to be able to live, and make money. And so it was more about that. But then I met a lawyer. I met my husband in law school, and he was a year ahead of me in school. And he had already gotten a position as a state attorney in Naples, Florida. We went to University of Miami for law. And so I ended up moving to Naples, and I met this woman named Victoria Ho, who was one of the top family law attorneys in the country. She was very involved with the ABA and everything. And she was also half Chinese like me, and we had a lot in common. And so she ended up hiring me. I really didn't have a plan to become a family law attorney at the time at all. But it was a great opportunity for me. And because she and John Asbell had pretty much all the top most significant cases in Collier County at the time, which Naples is a very affluent community. And so it was a great opportunity for me. So I really, came up through the ranks as a high net worth divorce litigation attorney. It's the only thing I've ever focused my practice on. I've been a lawyer now for 24 years, which is so crazy, but it is what it is. And so, I then went out on my own. And I can say that, I used to have a joke among my family law colleagues where we would say, the husband always says the wife is crazy, and the wife always says the husband is controlling. So that was kind of like what we heard for years and years and years. And it wasn't until, I want to say, maybe the last 5 years, 7 years, something like that, that we really started hearing the word narcissist all the time. And instead of she's crazy or he's controlling, it became everyone said they're a narcissist. And so that was when I really started saying, you know what, I need to figure out this, because they just want to call this person a narcissist all the time. So let me figure out what it is that I'm dealing with. And so I really started diving into studying narcissism, which, by the way, Splitting was one of the books that I read when I
Oh,
first started learning about it.
great.
Um, and of course, I was familiar with Biff too. I remember a judge specifically one time in one of my cases where a narcissist was definitely involved on the other side, where she actually gave us homework, or gave my client homework to read your book. And she actually had copies that she wanted them to return like the following month, and they had to like read it and report back to her like a book report what they learned from the book, which was really funny. And that was, I don't know, probably
I love
15
it.
years ago. Yeah. Yeah. So
Well,
that's
that's
how I
the-
really started studying it, to win. And then, and then I started realizing, wow, I've had a lot of narcissists in my life too, through my family or people, I mean, obviously everybody has had to deal with them. So I kind of figured that out too.
Interesting. So, Bill,
Yeah. So, given that you've learned that and you came in as a lawyer, what would you say or one or two tips that you give to people? And I know you give hundreds of tips, but if you'd say one or two key tips that you found really did help prepare for court with a narcissist, and then I'm going to ask for negotiations with a narcissist. But first, and I agree that court cases are maybe 20% of divorces. But
Oh
what,
yeah, we talked about that before we got on the air here.
right, we had a little chat, so I want to make sure
Yeah.
we get this included. So say a couple tips and kind of what your approach to preparing and what you teach people. And I guess a question I have with that is, are you teaching lawyers or teaching everyday people who might represent themselves, or are these tips that really apply across the board?
Great questions. Let me see if I can take them like a little bit at a time here. So before we got on here, we talked about how like 80% or so of family law cases do actually settle out of court through mediation. Most jurisdictions that I'm aware of actually, it's mandatory to mediate. And so most cases, I think, do settle in mediation. At least that was my experience. But there was always that 20% or so, 15, 20% of cases that ended up in trial. And I always used to say it was always that one person was unreasonable. And I would say now, after doing my research for my book, and I realized, oh, wait a minute, according to the DSM, at least 15% of the population has a personality disorder that lacks empathy. And then there's also that whole other level of people who are high conflict. Well, there may be some overlap, but not completely. So if you look at, okay, there's 15 to 20% of the population that either has a personality disorder that lacks empathy, or there's a section of the population that has high conflict, and you look and you juxtapose that figure with the number of people that settle or don't in family law cases, I don't think that's an accident. I just don't. I think that it's pretty something that you can kind of come to the conclusion that the people who end up in front of a judge having to hash it out as in trial are usually people who have some kind of issue. It's either one or both. And so now going back to how do I prepare them? How would I say to prepare? And so who am I teaching? Well, let me answer that question first. So with my SLAY program, that would be what you call B2C, but, direct to the consumer. And that's really for people, anybody who's litigating against a narcissist, because it helps people prepare their cases, and I tell them what to do, and I give them all of the tools. And it can be for people who are pro se, but it can also be for people who are mostly for people who are working with an attorney, because attorneys are there to help people with the law. They know the law, but they don't know the facts of your case. They don't have access to all of your emails or your texts or your documentation, or they don't know the witnesses that are involved. They don't know what has happened. So as a lawyer, you have to rely on the client to give you all the information that you need to fill in for presenting the law as it applies to your particular case. And so having an organization around that, knowing how to document properly, is absolutely key. It's really, really key. The other thing is, and I can come back to the documentation piece and the leverage and all of that, but the other thing that I think is really important for people to understand is that a narcissist, or whoever it is, and I always say to people, you don't need to label them, because it really doesn't matter what their label is, and all of that. But you're dealing with a person who had trauma in childhood, and when we are in survival mode, fight or flight mode, our bodies produce adrenaline and cortisol. And what happens with narcissists or narcissistic people or anybody like that is that the cortisol levels actually caused arrested development in the limbic system part of their brain. And so while the prefrontal cortex continues to develop naturally, normally, this limbic system actually, they're actually like 2-year-olds stuck in adult bodies sometimes, right? And so when they feel a perceived slight or threat or loss of control or anything that causes them to be triggered, as you know, they have that aspect of their personality that switches like this, and they immediately, you become public enemy number one. Now, I have to get you before you can get me. I got to take you down. There's this whole, because their limbic system has taken over, their prefrontal cortex shuts down. You're not dealing with reasonable. You're not dealing with rational. You're dealing with a person who's full on in emotion. They're driven by emotion. And the thing that was baffling to me as an attorney, which I now understand, is that these people will take themselves down. They will self-sabotage in order to take the other person down. I would have people literally say to me, I will burn my business to the ground before I pay her a penny. And you think, why in the heck would you do that? But that's because you're dealing with a person who's not being rational. So most people sit down at a negotiation table and they go, hey, we don't want to pay a lot in attorney's fees. Let's do the right thing. I want to move on with my life. I'm sure you do too. How can we come to a rational conclusion for this? But you're not dealing with that when you're dealing with this type of a personality.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I wanted to mention, I noticed on one of your programs, was the idea that when you go to court, you don't want to use the word narcissist.
No.
You don't want to say, Your Honor, my husband's a narcissist, case closed.
Correct.
It doesn't work like that.
Correct.
So what do
Yes.
you tell them to do instead?
Yes. Oh, such a great question. I love talking to you because you're a lawyer too, so you have great questions. So here's what I tell people all the time. There's this disconnect between where they are, which is, I signed up for this life. I thought I was going to have the dream life, whatever it is. And this has been stolen from me by this narcissist in some way. And so they have to deal with this feeling of, it's not fair, and I want to be made whole, and they're angry about all sorts of things, and they feel like the narcissist is getting away with everything because everyone sees them as charming or whatever, and they're left holding the bag. And so they want to be wrongs to be righted for that. And I always tell people the court is not, that's not the court's job. The court's job is to apply the law. And so if there's a law around property division or spousal support or custody or child support, then they look at the law and they go, how can we apply this? So, and what people think a lot of times is they're not being fair, the judge is against me or whatever. What they have to understand is they need to take their information and translate it into something that the judge is going to care about, which is the law. And so if it's a custody situation and there's a best interest statute, and the best interest statute has factors or elements within that. And one of them might be, for example, which parent is more likely to foster a close and continuing relationship with the other parent. Well, now you can take your texts and your emails and your witnesses and your social media or whatever it is, and you can put it under that factor and say, here's a summary of all the times that the person, badmouthed me or refused to give me my time sharing or showed up late, whatever it is, or lied, inconsistent statements. And then now you're speaking the court's language. Now the judge is actually going to care. And you don't need to use the word narcissist. You don't need to bring that up. You just put it in terms of the statute.
So a quick question about that, because we've been saying the same thing for a long time. It's going in and saying, my so-and-so is a narcissist or a borderline or a sociopath. It's never going to be a win for you. And on that line, I noticed in a lot of your material, you use the word win. Does that kind of bring a level of hope to people, or why do you use the word win?
Well, and that's a good question. I mean, I would say a win is wherever they want to be. And really the thing that I most teach, and that's part of the SLAY methodology. So strategy, leverage, anticipate, and you. The Y actually stands for you taking back your power, you having authentic power, you understanding that this person over here is never going to change. And so you have to stand in your authentic power. And to be honest with you, I always say they're more afraid of you than you are of them. And if you start standing in your authentic power, they're not going to bother you anymore. The more you get triggered by them, the more you're giving away your power to them. You're basically handing them the keys to your power. And I always like to use the visual of Glinda the Good Witch in Wizard of Oz, and how when the Wicked Witch came around her, she was like, go away, you have no power here. It was like, oh, please, lady, like, come on, I have no time for you. And the Wicked Witch was like, oh God, I'm staying away from her. Like, she was afraid of her a little bit, like she was intimidated, but it was because Glinda knew who she was. She stood in her power, and she didn't have to be angry or fight her off or do anything. She wasn't trying to prove anything to the Wicked Witch because, she knew who she was. And so I think that's really, to me, what a win looks like. I mean, other than with the S in SLAY, I always tell people that they need to create a vision of what they want for an outcome, because so many times when you're dealing with a narcissist, their vision is like kind of it's within the context of the narcissist. And what I mean by that is, like, they'll say, well, I just want them to stop, or I just want them to get their justice on them, or it's always like defined by them rather than defined by you and your power and what you want, and being offensive in your approach in dealing with them, instead of always on the defensive and thinking about what they're wanting.
Awesome. So let's take a quick break and we'll come back and we're going to talk more with Rebecca Zung. Thank you. All right, we're back, and we have a question about restraining orders and whether they work with a narcissist who is violent.
Oh gosh, such a good question. You guys are asking me questions that nobody else has ever asked, but such good ones. So I would say if you are going to go get a restraining order, you better be darn sure that it's going to stick, because many times when I was practicing, people would say, I want a restraining order or whatever. And then if you end up, and I wasn't on the plaintiff side for that, like I usually would refer that out to the criminal attorney, but you know, there's going back to the statute, you know, you have to look to see what the requirements are under the statute. And, you know, sometimes you can get a restraining order issued ex parte on a temporary basis, like without the judge being, I mean, without the other party being involved, just go straight to the judge. But then because of the Constitution, you have to have notice and opportunity to be heard. So that other side is going to get their day in court like pretty quickly. And if you don't have enough to pass muster under the statute and it gets dismissed, now they're going to feel empowered. They're going to feel like, hey, look, you tried and didn't work. So now I can come after you. I can do whatever I want. So I would just say, if you are going to try to get a restraining order, make darn sure that you have enough under the statute that it's going to turn into a permanent injunction. And then, you know, depending on how
What's that
malignant
mean?
they are.
Sorry to interrupt. What does that mean, a permanent injunction?
So permanent means that it'll last for at least a year, or maybe longer, depending on what the judge decides. And they'll say, you know, you have to come back in a year and decide whether or not it's going to stick again. You know, it depends. It depends on the court. The judge can decide what they want to do on that. But the thing about it is, what I have seen, depending on how malignant they are, is that they will figure out exactly what the line is on that sometimes. And they will, you know, they will go travel right on it so that you know that they're still around in some way. I mean, it can be very, very frustrating for people.
I'd like to go. So we've talked about court cases, but let's go with the 80% negotiation. And your books are about that, and your work is about that. Can you give our listeners, say, 2 tips for if you're negotiating with a narcissist? What are a couple things to make sure you do or don't do?
Yes. So this now comes back to the SLAY method. And then, so as a strategy, figuring out what you want, and be clear, be very specific. You know, if you want half the assets, well, what does that mean to you? That means you're keeping the house, the business, the this, the that, whatever, what needs to be done. If you're looking at spousal support, what do you need to do? You need to get forensics involved. You need to look at lifestyle, income sources, your income sources. Like, there's a lot of different things to look at there. But with leverage, which is the L in SLAY, this is where it's really unique to a high conflict or a narcissistic personality, because the leverage is always going to be around their supply source. So what feeds their ego? How do they look to the world? So with supply, there's what I call, I've kind of like tiered it into 2 different levels, which is what I call diamond level supply and then coal level supply. And diamond level supply is their image, their reputation, how they look to the world, and they will protect and defend this at any cost, And then the coal level supply is what I call the dark underbelly of narcissistic supply, which is like manipulating and game playing and moving the goalposts and smearing and all of those things that they don't want people to know that they're up to, but they're definitely up to. And they love both forms of supply. They want to keep both forms of supply very desperately. They're like drug addicts, so they'll take anything off the, you know, whatever it is. And however, if you come up with leverage in a way, and this is through your documentation, that that demonstrates that you can threaten a source of supply that's more important for them to keep or protect or defend than the supply that they get from manipulating you, jerking you around, and that sadistic side of things, then they will let go. Then they will let go of that level of supply, and only then. Otherwise, you're never going to be free of them, ever. So how do you do that? You do that through your documentation. Going back to what we had started to allude to before. And in my SLAY program, I provide templates and all sorts of modules on teaching people. I give the 12 different areas to document, and I actually have my own curated negotiation GPT where we've pre-programmed it with all of my books and my videos and all sorts of things. So it understands the concept of supply and all of that. And so what you can do is you can actually upload PDFs or like I've seen people take their entire app chat, like from their parenting plan app, there's like 300 pages, and then just upload it in there and say, hey, how would you create leverage based on Rebecca Zung's method? And it'll come out with like 10 different arguments to make. Times this person refused to do this, or times this, person was late, or whatever. And it will literally cite the sections of the text for you, and help you create leverage like that, and help you come up with arguments that you would never even thought of. It's pretty cool. It's like magic, actually.
We should give you a chance to say what the A is and what the Y is. So we've got S for strategy, L for leverage. What's the A and what's the Y?
A is anticipate. So anticipate what they're going to do and be 2 steps ahead of them, which is really that they're going to bait you. They're going to try to trigger you. As you know, dealing with a narcissist, a divorce is like getting arrested, and anything you say or do is going to be used against you. And so, I have like so many different methodologies for people to deal with it. Like for one thing is like never jade. I always say I'm half Chinese, so I always wear jade, but never jade, which is never justify, argue, defend, or explain. Because, you're never going to see a narcissist go, oh, you know what? I'm totally convinced now. I totally get it.
Yep.
I see your side.
We're still waiting.
Yeah. And so, or I say making a plan stand. So if you're going to meet with them, make sure that you have a plan, an agenda, a scope, and a time limit. And make sure they know about it in advance, because they're going to try to make things personal, or they're going to sandbag you. They're going to bring up stuff from, 20 years ago or whatever. And they're never going to let you finish the sentence. It's going to be about, oh, why are you bringing that up now? Or, oh, you're yelling, or you interrupted me, or, whatever, because they're never going to let you get to your point. And so you want to make sure that you have an agenda, like this is what we're here to talk about, and a time limit. So like I give like it's under the A whole bunch of different ways that people can deal with it. And then the Y is what we talked about earlier, which is that you in your 100% power, knowing that you're going to win, like completely knowing that you're going to get the result that works for you, and that you're going to stand in your own power and actually be able to walk away without feeling any sense of resentment or anger, or because all of that gives them power. And to me, that's what it's all about.
Great. Well, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Covered a lot.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Thank you so much, Rebecca. This is really interesting. And it's, very, very, very familiar to us. We're all talking the same language. I was thinking when you're talking about the 80% and the 15 to 20% was, looking at data years and years ago when I was with the Arizona Supreme Court administrative offices. I was looking at the parent education data from mandatory parent education classes. It was typically, around 15%, maybe 20% of those who took the class who said this just was no help at all.
Oh, of
And
course.
80% of folks would say, oh, I got a lot out of that. I figured out I shouldn't call, the ex a nasty name in front of the kids, or and they would adapt. 80% can adapt. 10 to 20% didn't seem to have that ability. And it was this group that really, that's why Bill and I started in this work, is to help this particular, help the professionals involved in cases like this understand and know what to do differently. And in so doing, you actually are helping the person as well, because they're not
Totally.
bad people,
Yeah,
right? We don't want to demean, belittle, denigrate. These are just often hurting people
yeah,
and they're hurting other people, and they just have a different operating system. And we need to, I think, to be as helpful as possible, we need to know these different skills like you teach, and it ultimately helps the children, and that's what we're all here
totally.
for.
Oh,
So
I mean, it's generational. I mean, it's really you're impacting generations through this work. And
absolutely.
I do want to say I have a high conflict certification training as well, and that's for anybody who wants to become a coach or just have the certification, and just to have the knowledge. And I've had quite a few lawyers come through my certification, so I would say it's not geared. It's not, I don't market it directly to lawyers, but I've had a lot of lawyers come through that and learn. So I am actually creating a next level program for more for lawyers on how to like advanced level negotiation, but also how to build a brand, how to take their practice a little bit more virtual if they want to. Because I've had so many people ask me how I did what I did, create courses and the whole thing, and my YouTube channel. So I figured, rather than spend an hour with each person individually, like I've been doing, I will package it up into a course, a training. So that's my next thing. It's coming out next month.
You're a busy
Great.
lady. Very busy. All right. Well, good. So thanks everyone for listening today. I hope you've enjoyed listening to Rebecca talk about her work, her very important work. Next week, we are going to do another asked and answered episode, because you've all been sending in a ton of questions and we'd love to answer the
Mhm.
questions. So we'll work on that. And then we have a little surprise announcement about a new series we'll be doing. So tune in next week. In the meantime, send your questions to podcast@highconflictinstitute.com or submit them to highconflictinstitute.com/podcast. And until next time, keep learning and practicing the skills. Be kind to yourself and others, while we all try to keep the conflict small and to find the missing piece.